Good afternoon. Oh, let's try that one more time. Good afternoon. I'm Ron Fairchild with the GLR Support Center, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to the closing session for our Community and State Leads Convening. What a great couple of days we have had in this ballroom together. Would you not agree? We began yesterday with a framing conversation about the two big themes for our work going forward: networked learning and improvement science. We got some inspiration from Nelson Gonzalez and from Sharon Greenberg. They gave us some practical tools that we can use in our collective efforts to build a culture of data-driven improvement and disciplined inquiry into what's working, where it's working, why it's working, with whom it's working, and under what conditions it's working. We heard from some great communities yesterday, from Charlotte, from Salt Lake, from Tacoma, folks that are already taking seriously this challenge of data-driven improvement. They're demonstrating that this shift in our thinking and the evolution of the campaign is not only possible, but it's already taking place. We talked with our national partners, United Way Worldwide, First Book, and PolicyLink, and we learned how they're using technology and large-scale data systems to address equity and to drive results in our work. And we capped the sessions yesterday with the rollout of our new GLR Learning for Impact and Improvement system. We heard from some early adopters, from Ames and from Kansas City and from Roanoke. And we had a fabulous keynote this morning from Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris. Wasn't that a terrific session? You've had leading edge luncheons. You've had a chance to play bigger and better outcomes bingo in this ballroom. And we are coming to a great closing session today on using data and learning science to drive impact and improvement. I am thrilled by the speakers that we have with us today. These folks are two incredible partners to the campaign, and I'm going to introduce them, give them an opportunity to speak, and then we're going to have a bit of a conversation and open it up to all of you for questions. Our first speaker is Mali Patel. Anu is the Vice President and the Director of Education for the Overdeck Family Foundation. Anu is a true friend and partner in this work. I think she embodies the principle of more than money philanthropy that we've been talking about all week. From the very beginning of this project, our GLR Learning for Impact and Improvement system, she has been an advisor. She has helped us identify partners. She's hosted strategy meetings. Some of our early adopters were able to join us in their offices in New York. She's hosted design sessions, and she's helped us secure resources necessary to bring this system to life. And so it is with great pleasure and a deep honor to welcome to the stage Anu. So thank you.
Hi, everyone. Happy Thursday afternoon. Happy to be here at this convening, sort of on the end stages. As Ron mentioned, I'm the Director of Education at the Overdeck Family Foundation. Our goal is to ensure that every child in America has the opportunity to unlock his or her unique potential. So we exclusively focus on American education and improving outcomes for kids and support research and organizations that aim to help children learn from birth through graduation. So in accomplishing our mission, we pursue and we fund evidence-based and scalable ideas for improving every stage of childhood learning, both in and out of the classroom. And that's why I'm so excited about the work that CGLR is doing and so proud that we're able to support them and all of you. One of our key beliefs at Overdeck is that we all learn better together. And as Ron mentioned, we really strive to sort of pursue the value of collaboration in our work, both with our grantees and our partners, as well as with our fellow funders. And we are really honest in admitting that collaboration is oftentimes slower and harder and certainly more hair-pulling. But we believe that it is our best chance for maximizing opportunity and the scaling of learnings across the field of education. And so that is why we're thrilled to be partnering with CZI in our support for CGLR, and partnering with Ron and Carolyn and Ralph and the full GLR team, specifically on the Learning for Impact and Improvement system. I heard this week that there's also a chance for an opportunity for renaming the system to something that might be a little less of a mouthful, so we're all ears. So as you know, this project really focuses on compiling and synthesizing data across the full network, really with the aim of capturing knowledge and sharing it across the community and helping you all to improve and iterate on solutions that can work best for the families and communities that you all serve. At its completion, we really hope that this system offers you all a chance to aggregate and organize and operationalize what's really working best for you and sharing it with folks that you work with closely. So our foundation partnered with CZI in the beginning stages of this work on the infrastructure of this project. As Ron mentioned, we hosted design sessions, we hosted user experience journeys that helped us to understand the needs that you all face in your communities and helping to sort of build a system that could respond to them. But that was really just one piece of the collaboration to make all the pieces fit. The second part was probably even more important, and that was our work with CGLR and with you all. And so from the beginning, we tackled this project with you all in a way that was really partnership oriented, and in a way that I really believe models what's best for philanthropy. When philanthropy works side by side with our partners and with our end users, which is you all, we really believe that we have the best opportunity for the highest impact work. So together, us and Ron and Ralph and Carolyn and you all, we envisioned what the ideal solution could look like. And really sincerely, it was like a whiteboard with big mapping and needs. And I think many of you in this room were a part of those early conversations with Ron and Zach and others to help us understand what you all wanted to see. And so we started with sort of understanding what is the vision and then really planning forward. What would it look like for us to get there over the course of a few years? So we've been at this work now for almost a year and a half, almost 2 years. And so we've been really excited to get to see us come to this point where we're actually getting a chance to get your experience and reactions with it. And I just, as very similar to Ron, feel so fortunate to have had the partnership with Ron and Carolyn and Ralph and GLR and Zach and DeClara, because I think this is what it looks like for philanthropy to achieve bigger and better outcomes. It really was all of us sort of rolling up our sleeves together, looking at the challenges and figuring out what could be next for this network. And I'm hopeful that more partnerships like this can be the model for philanthropy going forward, and can serve as a potential blueprint for how we can work really side by side. So as you know, this system at its core is a user-centered project. So what does that mean? That means that the success of the system really depends on you all, on your use of it, your feedback, and your commitment to its success. And so this system is really yours to use, and all we've done is create the backbone and the infrastructure, but ultimately, you all are the key to its development, its completion, and its success. So we believe that upon completion of this system, the GLR community can actually achieve scale, but most importantly, it has the possibility to share strategies with communities that need it the most. So I just wanted to take the opportunity to thank all the communities in this room who have been a part of our early adopter sort of work, and that includes communities like Sarasota, Manatee, Tacoma, Indian River, and Philadelphia. So big claps to you, as well as many others in this room who've been a part of the work from the very beginning as a part of the early road tests. So one of the key principles that we use behind user-centered design is the importance of rolling out a project gradually to cohorts. And I know Zach and DeClara and Ron have been very thoughtful about rolling out additional cohorts every month to get a sense for what it feels like to use it, getting your feedback, and then making appropriate adjustments to make it better serve your needs. And so this process we expect will continue over the next 18 months or so. But really, I've been most heartened to see that just in this past year, there's already 82 communities up on the system, and to see people like you all using it to share bright spots and lessons learned is sort of just a real highlight for us. And while we cannot ignore the importance of context and empathy in systems like these, especially in the context of decision making, we also know that decisions based on data and evidence are often the best decisions that are positioned for improvement and growth. And this system puts data at the fingertips of folks like you all at the center of communities, helping you all to make the most data-informed decisions within the context that you all are in. So one example of this idea and practice, and I know that Zach yesterday in his session had a chance to sort of give many of you a chance to look at the system in action, but one example of this in practice is the benchmarking feature, which allows users like you all to track performance on the key indicators that I know you all care about, things like school readiness, school attendance, summer learning, and overall grade level reading. And to see those results side by side can better facilitate learning amongst all of you. I was telling Ron at the break that I loved seeing the whiteboard out here by the snacks that showed sort of drawings of like who's connecting with whom and who's sharing and learning. And we were just talking about, wouldn't it be incredible to see that on the network and on this system, just so you actually can facilitate and understand who's talking to whom, who's sharing what resources to better facilitate your own learning. So as the saying goes, we know that we cannot change what we cannot see, which is why making it so easy to understand what's happening across our communities can really lead to the system's success and ultimately our collective success as a network. So I'm so glad to that we have a system now that allows us to gain insight into what's working, and was really happy to see the pacesetter communities that were recognized last night. And really, ultimately, I'm proud that we have a tool now that we didn't have 2 years ago that can actually, that folks like Kansas City and Ames and Roanoke are already using to strengthen the collaboration within your local coalitions and to measure the effectiveness of your work. So given the early success of this program, we have strong confidence that we can and that we will reach our goal of at least 100 communities that are active on the system by the end of this year. So those of you who are thinking about joining, we encourage you to get active. And for folks who need a little more time, our goal is to get 200 communities active on this system by the end of next year. And so I'll close with just a short sort of call to action around what it is that you all can do to make this system really live and work in your benefit. And so there's sort of 4 key things that we believe that each of you all can do that can be helpful to the system, but most importantly to our collective success. One, sort of walking out of here thinking about who is the local data partner, learning and data partner that you all can sort of identify that can be your lead. 2, thinking about what it is, what stories and what data do you want to share on the system. 3, really trying to explore and play around with the system to see which ways the system can serve your own benefit. And then 4th, just providing feedback to this tool and the system to make it better for you individually, but for the network as a whole. So again, just a huge, warm thank you for your time and your work. It's an honor to be able to work alongside you, both in this system, but also towards this broader mission. So I'll turn it back over to Ron with that.
Thank you, Anu. Our next speaker is Katrina Stevens from the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative. Katrina is the Director of Learning Science at CZI, and she and her entire team have been such great partners to the campaign and has been so instrumental in helping us develop the GLR Learning for Impact and Improvement system. Again, we've gotten a lot more than money from our relationship and our partnership with CZI. This comes from the advice that we've received. It's pretty special and unique when you could have a technology meeting in California with Facebook engineers at the table. And that's what we were able to do with our partnership with CZI. Katrina's colleague, Christina Quattrocchi, said something to us early on in this effort that stuck with me. And she said that the technology is the easy part. The hard part is developing the culture and building the network and really nurturing the kind of interaction that really makes the system come to life. And so it is with great pleasure that I can welcome Katrina Stevens to the stage. Katrina?
I feel a little bit like an imposter because Christina, the colleague that you mentioned, actually did all the hard work on this project. In fact, when this project started, my team didn't exist yet. But I'm really excited to be here, and we are at CZI really excited about the work that's come out of this project and to continue to keep supporting. So really just going to talk a little bit about how this work connects to how we think about learning engineering. And I'm going to just explain what that is in a second. But many of you probably know, but I get asked this frequently, so I just want to share a little bit. What is Chan Zuckerberg Initiative? A few years ago, Mark and Priscilla wrote a letter when their first daughter, Max, was born, saying that they were going to give 99% of their wealth for philanthropy. And so the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative is the vehicle for which that they do that work. And one thing I think that's also important to know about Priscilla Chan is that she is a pediatrician and has started a school called the Primary School. So a lot of the way she thinks about this work really is embedded in understanding kind of the needs of young children. At the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, we believe in a future for everyone. And specifically in education, we believe that education can unlock and advance human potential, empowering people to lead fulfilling lives and solve the challenges of the future for both themselves and for the world. So small. We have, in addition to education, we have a couple of other strands of work. So one of those is in science. And in that work, the goal is to solve, to cure or manage all disease by the end of the century. So another small goal. And we also do some work around economic opportunity and criminal justice. And so some of the strains of those other work actually have impact in terms of the work that we do in education around the grade level reading work. One of the things that the lens that we really think about things through is a whole child approach. I saw this repeatedly in the conference where there was conversations around the young brain or the adult brain does not just have the academic brain functioning at a time. So when a young reader is approaching reading, all of these other factors impact them significantly, and some more than others. For example, just kind of referring to the presentation this morning, how important it is to recognize the context for which children are coming in. So we think that physical and mental health, for example, are significant in development. The SEL components of things, identity, and how that impacts how children approach reading and other kinds of learning. It's also important to note that it's not just the young people, but the adults that work with the young people, and recognizing that they have a context and they have a mindset, they have their own, their rest of their brain is working on other things in addition to helping a young person learn how to read. In fact, one of our first investments in education was funding a program that provides eyeglasses for young children. Because if you are not able to, in terms of that physical health, if you're not able to read the board, you're not able to learn. So we really do actually think about the continuum, the whole model, the whole child. Okay, I'm actually just put this all up. So one of the examples, just to kind of talk about how we think about learning engineering. So we know a lot about how the mind operates, and this is just an example in terms of memory. So we know the difference between working memory and long-term memory. How can we take that learning science and how do we actually put that into practice? So it's one thing to know this, and we've actually known a lot of this information about how memory works, and particularly how recall works for quite some time, but it hasn't really been applied to well enough in terms of how we actually put that into practice. So one way to think about like learning engineering, so you start with what we know about how learning works. And then you use technology to kind of implement and enhance good solutions. And I'm always careful to talk about good solutions because technology in and of itself is not the answer. Tech is a way to be able to accelerate, to be able to amplify. But the core of that is actually still fundamentally what is the good practice. And it's also at its core, technology is really about creating and helping enhancing relationships. It never replaces that relationship between an adult and a student or a student and a student. And then you use evidence. So once you have that technology, including the platform they're talking about, then you can actually start to learn from that. And you can learn much more quickly, and then you can share those results. So one thing that technology has given us is just access to much more nuanced data than we've ever had before. So we're able to kind of dig in and understand exactly what Ron was talking about in terms of the context. What works for whom and what conditions in which children in a way that we couldn't do before we had technology. So that's really kind of how we define learning engineering. I also want to talk about like another example. We often will talk about like motivation more broadly, but it's actually important to understand what kinds of motivation you're talking about, because it matters quite a bit in terms of what the solution is in terms of that. Because often you'll hear people saying, well, my kids just aren't motivated to read. It's important to know, well, why? Like, what's going on with that? Because you might have different responses and interventions depending on who's in your classroom. So if a kid is coming in and saying, like, I don't see any value in this, I'm never gonna, like, I don't need to read this kind of story about kids that look nothing like me, that's a whole different thing than, this is really hard and I'm missing some gaps, and so I'm just gonna kind of turn off at this point. And so it's really important to kind of dig in and use what we know about motivation to be able to figure out, okay, what does that mean that the intervention should get designed? And how are we learning about it? What does that look like at scale? And so that kind of comes to that question of like, this is one of our fundamental questions at CZI that we're really trying to learn more about. And in essence, like CZI really is a startup. We've really only been around 2 years. We're a well-resourced startup, but we're still actually in the early learning part. So one of the things we really are trying to learn is like, how do we learn from the collective knowledge and insight, and how do we share that? There are amazing, I mean, there's I think 390 communities that are involved in this work. And all of you are learning something and gaining insights that are really nuanced and important. How do we actually get that to everyone else that's in the community so that people aren't having to replicate that work over and over and over again? And so one of the things about the platform that's exciting is that it allows us to be able to share those insights more quickly and more easily. But it's one thing that we're just interested in broadly is that question of like, how do we create these kind of network communities? How do we take advantage of that kind of local expertise and be able to share that with others who can really take advantage of that expertise? We also believe deeply that it needs to be an authentic problems of practice. Some of the work that we do in learning science, in our team we have several different measures. I'll talk about our strands of work. So one of them is measurement, really looking at are there measures that exist that aren't being used? For example, the ACEs that was just talked about earlier. Are there things that we care deeply about we just don't have very good measures for yet? So really thinking about what is out there already and what are those gaps and how can we help fill some of those gaps? And in particular about more than just academic outcomes. Then another strand of our work is around learning engineering. So how do we take what we know about learning science and how do we put that into practice? And that's in parents' hands, that's in pediatricians' hands, that's in parents' hands, it's in educators' hands. So all the adults that are working around children, how do we actually get that expertise? What does that look like at scale? You know, there are ways that technology can do that. Can it support that? Are there ways that we redesign some of our programs about, for example, like how people learn how to teach reading? How do we do that at scale? And then how do we get just best practices and better tools out there that are based on evidence? So I'm kind of really creating an environment where when people are purchasing or adopting practices, they ask questions of like, well, what's the evidence? And does that evidence matter and connect with and align with my students? Because yes, maybe that worked over there, but I don't know if that's gonna work with my children. What does that look like? And then we are also doing some directed development work. Some of you may have seen, we had an RFI that we put out with Gates Foundation. I think some of you even applied or provided information and insight for that, so we really appreciate you taking the time to do that. And that work is around creating almost like an ARPA Ed, so the ability to take problems, really challenging, nodding problems that take normally 20 years or so to solve and try to solve them in about 5 years. And that's bringing in experts from lots of different disciplines. The RFI, we were focused on reading was one of those pieces, in addition to executive function and math. And for us, reading in and of itself is less how we kind of approach it. It's really like, what are all the things around the reading that also matter? So how do things like, what do the images in the book that a child's reading, how does that impact where they are in their identity development, and how does that prepare them in terms of how they're learning to read? So all of those other pieces around that whole child, how do those impact reading? And then we also have something called education innovation clusters. And these are regional centers where people are both educators, the community, developers, and educators are all working together to be able to work on real true problems of practice. So the idea is, instead of, sometimes in traditional research, it's often that a researcher will be really curious about something, and so they ask, can I have a set of children to be able to work through this inquiry about. This is kind of reversing that, and it's really around what are the problems of practice that are coming out, and then is there something about that researchers have an expertise on that they can really help that, and are there things that like developers could also be able to help that. The idea is that after that first problem of practice that you're kind of digging in, you start iterating more rapidly, and then the next problem, you already have all that infrastructure in place. And for us, that's one of the things why we're really excited about the platform for grade level reading is really around the ability, once you have that infrastructure, it takes a little bit longer to build that, and we have one of our core values is build slow to go fast. And so it takes some time to set something up, but once it's there, you can actually start really learning from each other much more rapidly as you kind of put those things into effect. I also wanted to just kind of call out, just because I know that a number of folks who are have roles that are attached to policy, ESSA was designed to really not just be able to call out the need for evidence. So it says that yes, you should be using evidence-based practices, but it also includes funding for being able to build that evidence base. So one of the things that collectively, as people are starting to learn from what's working and in what context, that there's funding to be able to actually capture that learning and be able to share that learning. So it's not just kind of like a check the box, but there's actually really opportunities built into that legislation and to the guidance that was put out that was around collectively creating more and more evidence. So I just want to leave that with you, and I think we're going to be able to take some questions and have a conversation about some of this work.
I'm going to invite Anu and Katrina to the stage, and I think we have time for a few questions if you'd like to ask them questions. Any questions? Yes.
My question is, was that about a particular grant program that people should be looking for and paying attention to coming out of the U.S. Department of Education, or were you saying that somehow baked into their use of Title I and other funds in their state plans, there was an evidence framework? Because I think we have talked about ESSA a bit,
Yes.
and it would be great to make sure we had clarity on that.
So I was at the Department of Ed when ESSA was passed, and I was part of the group that wrote a document that was about strengthening investments using evidence. And that particular document and guidance, which is actually still relevant now, because some of the legislation came back, but that was actually one that is still carrying forward. Thanks. That guidance was for all of ESSA. I mean, it really talked about how evidence is used throughout, and as a call around continuous improvement. Now, Title I actually has some really explicit things around what level of evidence you need around things like reading programs. But the guidance really is around comparing to the previous legislation. This is a significantly increased for use of evidence than what was there before, and there are funding opportunities. And I don't know what's going to come out of Ed in the future, but I do know that that states have the ability to use that funding to be able to design these kinds of iterative processes in their own states.
Other questions? Elliot? Oh. Let's go there first and then over to Elliot. Go ahead.
Great, thank you. On the question of evidence, I was struck by a piece I read recently from Jack Shonkov, sort of positing that we may have over-focused on sort of the evidence base in early childhood as opposed to the significance of the evidence or the depth of the evidence, right, to my layman's interpretation, right, that we're looking for strength of effect as opposed to how important that effect is long-term, what's the actual underlying measure. I'm curious to hear both of your reactions about that.
So we've actually been having conversations with Jack about some of that work, and particularly interested in some of the work he's actually doing with pediatricians, and because oftentimes those are kind of your first source with acting with young people. In terms of, for us, it's really thinking about a continuum of evidence, because right now we're kind of in a place where it is all or nothing. It's either wide-scale, multi-year longitudinal study that with a very large n size, or it doesn't count. So these RCTs, and is there some level in between, and particularly around capturing this context, because this context is so important. Like you need to know what the factors are that are present in whether or not something's going to work or not work, and being able to know how do you iterate on that? How do you? I talk about hacking all the time. How do you take an intervention and hack it to actually work and match the young people that you're working with?
Yeah, so I'll just underscore the last point that you shared, Katrina. For us, what we've been talking about internally is just given the existing evidence base that sort of overemphasizes RCTs, which we know are difficult to replicate and are difficult to scale to multiple contexts. How do we think about what it means to then take the what of an intervention and modify the how to the local context and the needs of a community? So we haven't figured that out yet, but there are conversations that we're having internally as well as what does it mean to fund across the full research spectrum from continuous improvement all the way to RCTs and not overemphasize one particular part of that continuum. Depending on the question that you're asking, there might be different methodologies that are more appropriate.
Thanks for your comments. I wonder, as you think about this learning platform and this campaign, whether there are technology-based applications for sharing of practice, evidence, data that are sort of models for you, and if you could sort of describe some of those and how they work and what you think it is both about the culture and the technology that's really helped them to be successful.
I can speak more to the second part of your question, Elliot, which is sort of like, what do we think are the capacities or the conditions that need to be present for this to work? And I think the thing that Ron and the GLR team and we've talked about, and Zach as well at Declara from the get-go, are how do we create the balance of collaboration and overemphasize and not emphasize competition in the context of this. So creating a strong culture that sort of creates competition in service of collaboration, but primarily collaboration. Secondly, how do we build the talent and the skill level on the full spectrum of data use, technology use, data analysis, understanding how to analyze data visualizations, and then the most important part is translating those insights to action locally. And so that's a huge part of, I know, what the GLR team and Ron have been thinking about is what does it mean for us to support communities with the appropriate sort of set of development opportunities to sort of expose to that. And then I would say, like the excitement and the motivation to use the tool, right, or the system and the platform. And so like, is the platform delivering real value to people? Is it actually answering real problems that people are facing in communities? Is it resolving real needs? And is it helping people to do their job better day to day? And if we're not delivering on that, then the system is not providing value. So I think those are a couple of things that I might say that we've been talking about and thinking about in development of the system.
I've worked with a number of organizations who are thinking about building platforms, and the one thing I've said to them is that if you build it, they won't come. So it's not about just like what does the technology look like. You can put all kinds of infrastructure in place, but if there isn't a community around that, then it's just going to fall. So you really need to spend a lot of time, which I think is happening in this project, in terms of really understanding the user and what do people need from it. And just in general, platforms need to be within somebody's already existing workflow. It needs to have value. It shouldn't be like one other place you've got to go post something. It should actually be built into the work that you're already doing, so you can get the information you want as you need it. And that's really kind of think like the value of a really good kind of platform.
So I have a question about data. One of the outcomes of the campaign is school readiness. And so for your two foundations, short of I'm from Hawaii, and we do not have a kindergarten entry assessment or a kindergarten readiness assessment. So how, as foundations, do you measure school readiness?
Good question. So there's not one measure, and so, as you noted, there's not one universal measure, and so as a result, our approach as a foundation is to, we don't set outcomes universally and ask grantees to measure against them. We just know that's not how people do their work. It's not relevant to the context. And so what we do instead is actually work with organizations to figure out what measures are you collecting, what is your work driving towards, and how do we help you to achieve your work more effectively and more efficiently for kids. So there do end up being commonalities in measures across grantees, and so we do look for, are there opportunities to set sort of core measures and flexible measures is how we think about it. But we really try to take each grantee and each effort as a sort of as much as we can, a sort of a unique instance, while also sort of paying attention to the meta level. Are there commonalities and meta measures that they're similar?
And when we think about, particularly because of our measurement work, I don't think there's really the right sets of measures even really necessarily exist in one package yet. So we do actually work with individual organizations to think about like what matters most to them. And then we actually do some work around, okay, if that measure doesn't quite exist yet, who might be able to actually provide insight to that? Is there a measurement that already exists somewhere that could be repurposed or redesigned? Or do we actually, this is a gap and we need to actually figure out how to actually create these measures. We don't have a particular stance on this is what readiness has to look like.
Hi, thank you so much. So when you were talking about learning engineering, and which is a full concept, and I was thinking about it in terms of how we support children, right? So what do we know about the science of learning for children? Is it also true for adults? Like, what's the science of learning for adults, and particularly for the adults who are working with children? And I'm thinking about, so I run an organization called Jumpstart. We work with thousands of adults around the country to support children. One of our challenges has been to help them increase their learning around something like learning through play, or some of these concepts that are really hard for them to grasp. So how does kind of your system, what you're talking about, apply to that?
Yeah, so actually, great question. Because one of the things that I'm going to channel Brewer, who I work closely with on the learning engineering, our learning science team. That the adult brain is just a grown-up children's brain, in the sense of yes, it's the whole child and it's the whole adult, and so all of those things need to matter a lot. For instance, like educator buy-in has a huge impact. We're educators involved in the decision to put in a particular kind of practice. They should be, and so. But if they're not, then that's an impediment to them being able to actually help children, because they have to kind of work through. They weren't included in that, and they don't know if it's the right thing. They want to do the right thing for their kids, but they don't have enough confidence yet in terms of that particular piece. So being really careful and mindful of that. I come from education, from K-12, and I get so frustrated around, you go to professional development meetings, and it's like a 2-hour workshop. I've got teachers who are 1 year, teachers who are who've been teaching for 30 years. I've got the PE teachers, the math teacher, and we give them the exact same professional development. And it's one of the things actually that I worked when I worked in Baltimore County Public Schools, was worked on how to tailor that. So when we rolled out our reading, it was actually when the Common Core, we rolled out the reading, we created and designed these little, so everybody got the overview about what reading should look like. It was instructional text, for example, or informational text, but every person got their own tailored example. So the 6th grade English teachers got a tailored example, and the math teachers got a tailored example. Just recognizing that adults are in different places and have different needs, and we really should be much more thoughtful about what does personalized professional development look like.
Please join me in thanking Anu and Katrina. So as we come to the conclusion of our gathering together, I want to underscore what Anu said earlier about the importance of the call to action. I think we all have to work together collectively to make this network work. And we might start on some of that by some creative ideas for a new name for this learning system. I've gotten some interesting suggestions thus far, and I would love to hear from all of you on that. And that speaks to this notion, and I think it's a really good sign and signal that people are already interested in naming this thing, because what it says to me is that there's an impulse of ownership going on. And that impulse of ownership is something that's going to be critical for this to actually work. We have to take up the challenge together of owning this system and making it live up to its capabilities and capacities. We have to do what the campaign has done from the very beginning. We have to translate our aspirations for this system into real action, and that action into accomplishment. And so I wanted to, again, underscore the importance of identifying your local GLR learning and data partner, your go-to person. This has been a role that has been traditionally under-attended to and under-resourced in collective impact models in communities across the country. We know that that work locally is incredibly hard and challenging, and it's rare for us to see communities that have dedicated capacity, a person that they can go to that's responsible for uploading the very best data and stories and information that they're gathering from their communities, and then downloading that information from the various networks that they might be part of. We want to see that capacity emerge. And that's part of the deal. That's part of the give and the get. We're investing a lot in the infrastructure, the technology infrastructure for the system, and we're hoping that all of you translate that excitement about it into real capacity to participate in it. So talk to your local university partners, talk to your local United Ways, have this be a topic of your local sponsoring coalition meetings, and to really be able to identify that person who is a go-to, who can be that dedicated resource for this system. And I want to close with aspirations for what we're trying to accomplish, what we want to see over the next 18 months. And I'm big on having concrete and specific goals that we can back map from. If people ask me sort of what the success of the mobilization effort around the campaign has been, it's been around the capacity to back map, to be very clear about what we're trying to accomplish, and to back map from that goal and from that target. And the times when we've been able to do that, we have been successful with all of your help and with all of your support. And so I really wanted to highlight a few key things: identify that local learning and data partner, start to benchmark some progress, start sharing your stories and your data on the system. We already know that communities have participated in our survey and are already raising their hands to join the system. We really want to see at least 200 GLR communities participating actively in this system by the close of next year. That's our target, and I know together we can accomplish that. We've built a high-caliber, best-in-class network of communities together. And now it's time that we take advantage of that and use that to continue to generate the knowledge and the wisdom that we need to move from outcomes to impacts. So thank you very much. Now, one thing I want to do before we close the session is to just say thank you to our incredible team at the Campaign for Grade Level Reading. It's moments like this and weeks like this where I always feel like I get a disproportionate amount of credit. There is an incredible team that has brought together and made this event and made this week possible. A few of them are in the room right now. Many of them are not. And that's a good thing because they're handling 1,000,001 things. Two colleagues in the room, Bob Saffold. I just want to say thank you to Bob for all of your hard work. Jenny Atkinson in the back. Jenny led the Bigger and Better Outcomes Bingo session, and I think we're going to be taking that on the road a little bit and sharing that with communities. Elizabeth Burke-Bryant. Two colleagues at the far table, Suzanne Immerman. You say that? And Yoli Flores. The rest of our team is buzzing around, including the Foundations Inc. staff who have been part of this. We could not have done it without them. I would ask you one favor. As you pass the registration table or Peace Fields, which is our staff office, if you see Suzanne Bell, please be sure to thank her. She has been the project director, project manager for this entire grade level reading week on our side with the Campaign for Grade Level Reading, and has done a fantastic job. So if you see her or other members of our team, in lieu of them being in here, please take a second to just say thank you to them, and thank the hotel staff here at Logan as well. The work that they've done to flip rooms and just to feed us all and to take care of us over the course of the days we've been here, it would mean a lot to all of them. So again, thank you. Have a great rest of the conference, and we'll see you soon.